tavern waiters. And if you want breeches, they give you a vest. Benedict Arnold, August 1776.
Arnold realized he was so outgunned that the best he could get would be a delaying action, a sort of a glorious defeat. He finished his fleet and sailed north, came off Valcour Island. The British, in the meantime, came south. Arnold chose, rather than to confront them, to extend his fleet from Valcour Island to the shore in a very narrow area. They could only get a few ships at a time where he was in his position, so his position equalized the strength between the British and the American fleets.
We suffered much for want of seamen and gunners. I was obliged myself to point most of the guns on board the Congress, which I believe did good execution. Benedict Arnold.
In a day-long battle on October 11th, Arnold's scrapped-together Navy fought the British to a draw. But he knew his Navy would be crushed if it remained in Valcour Bay. That night, his small fleet slipped through a gap in the British line. Arnold knew that the British could now outsail him and outgun him on the open lake.
He ran his ships aground, burned them, and he made a point of leaving the American flag flying, so it was not a surrender, and escaped with his remaining sailors, who were really soldiers, overland back down to Fort Ticonderoga.
With winter on the way, Guy Carleton chose to return to Quebec rather than push his attack down the Hudson to New York. Arnold's action on Lake Champlain had delayed the decisive British movement for a year. The British refused to give up their strategy of a northern invasion by way of the Hudson. British General Johnny Burgoyne had written a plan of conquest that focused on controlling that river. And in the summer of 1777, while Washington occupied Howe in the Philadelphia area, he set out from Fort St. John's, Canada, to execute it. His army of over 9,000 consisted of British regulars, German troops, loyalists who had fled to Canada, and American Indian allies. Burgoyne himself traveled with 30 carts of personal belongings, a lavish supply of wine and champagne, and a very attractive loyalist mistress. Another woman, Madame Frederica von Riedesel, and her 3 small children traveled with the army. She was the wife of the German commander, Major General Baron von Riedesel, and wrote some of the most sensitive and accurate observations of the campaign.
General Burgoyne spent half of his nights in singing and drinking and diverting himself with his mistress, who was as fond of champagne as himself. Madame Frederica von Riedesel.
Burgoyne was a playboy, a socialite, a writer of plays, an actor, and he was perpetually in debt. The British writer Horace Walpole said that he had more sail than ballast, which means that he had more dash and confidence and prudence.
General Burgoyne was idolized by the army, his orders appearing more like recommending subordination than enforcing it. He was the soldier's friend. Grenadier Lieutenant William Digby.
Although he retained the confidence of his troops to a remarkable extent, in no other sense, it seems to me, could you describe him as a good commander.
Burgoyne's first obstacle was the Gibraltar of the North, Fort Ticonderoga. Since Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold had taken the fort from the British in May of 1775, it had remained in rebel hands for over 2 years, under the command of Arthur Sinclair. When Burgoyne placed artillery on nearby Mount Defiance, the rebels knew he could rain destruction on the forts at will.
St. Clair was forced into making a decision. Should he try and defend Ticonderoga with an insufficient force, or should he basically evacuate the fort, save those Continental troops, to fight another day. And in fact, they did. The 10 Continental regiments that were evacuated from Ticonderoga ended up going in the battles of Saratoga in September and October of 1777.
Albany, New York, was Burgoyne's goal. There, according to his plan, he would meet two other British armies, Mary St. Leger's smaller force coming from the west, and William Howe's larger force coming up the Hudson from the south. In reality, he would meet disaster at Saratoga. For Mary St. Leger's eastbound army, the trouble started when they reached Fort Stanwix and met tough rebel resistance. With his Indian and Loyalist allies, he laid siege to the fort. A relief column coming to his aid met fierce resistance at the Battle of Oriskany.
Easily more than 50% of the male white population of Tryon County were involved in the Battle of Oriskany, trying to kill each other on the Loyalist side or on the Whig or rebel side. Many historians have described the Battle of Oriskany in terms of the number of combatants involved as probably one of the bloodiest in American history.
Once again, Benedict Arnold found an important role to play in the struggle. He led another party to relieve the rebels trapped by the siege of Fort Stanwix. But before he arrived, Arnold sent the half-witted Han Yost, a man St. Leger's Indians considered to be holy, to tell them that Arnold's army was huge.
In fact, the tradition says that he described it as numerous as the leaves on the trees. Over half of St. Leger's force was composed of Native Americans. And in fact, even before Benedict Arnold arrived here to relieve the siege, St. Leger had abandoned the siege because of the defection of large numbers of his Native American forces.
Fort Stanwix had utterly defeated St. Leger. He would be of no help to Burgoyne, who had faced his own trials, cutting his way through dense, humid, mosquito-plagued New York forest. Bad news had come from Sir Henry Clinton, Howe's second in command. The letter read like nonsense, but with an hourglass-shaped mask placed over the text, Burgoyne could read the secret message.
Sir W. Howe is gone to the Chesapeake Bay with the greatest part of the army. I hear he has landed, but am not certain. I am left to command here with too small a force to make any effectual diversion in your favor.
Shortly after receiving the devastating news that Howe's main army would probably not join him in Albany, a detachment of Burgoyne's troops met rebel militia near Bennington, Vermont, an area known as the Hampshire Grants.
That force was literally almost annihilated. It was either wounded, killed, or captured almost entirely. The relief column sent out to reinforce it was stopped dead in the water. This was a major setback for Burgoyne's army, and in fact the first major setback of a campaign with regard to his advance on Albany.
We do not know how many we have killed. One of our scouts found, at the beginning of this week, 26 of the enemy lying dead in the woods. They stank so they could not bury them. The wounded Hessians die 3 or 4 in a day. They're all in the Bennington Meeting House, which smells so it is enough to kill anyone to be in it. Peter Clark, farmer, militiaman.
The Hampshire Grants, a country unpeopled and almost unknown in the last war, now abounds in the most active and rebellious race on the continent. General Johnny Burgoyne, fall 1777.
Just a week after the Battle of Bennington, Burgoyne learned of Mary St. Leger's failure at Fort Stanwix. But without St. Leger, and especially without Howe, Burgoyne still decided to push his weary and casualty-ridden army on to Saratoga, and then Albany. It was a decision on which the fate of the war would hinge. when General John